All right, so it's 8 o'clock, so I'm going to start, I think, on our very last week 12, very last webinar for the semester. So just in case I go over and people drop off, I'm going to start by saying thank you. I've had a ball. I've really enjoyed working with this group, even when you've been driving me crazy. And I hope you can say the same about me, that you enjoy working with me even when I've been driving you crazy. It's been a really busy semester. The standard of the work that I've seen has been absolutely sensational. Without exception, everybody that I've dealt with has been pleasant and friendly and professional, and so I just think you guys are going to rock it, because now's probably, I can tell you, that doesn't always happen. Not everybody is pleasant to me when they call me or email me or WhatsApp me or however they communicate with me, and it really makes a difference to my life, so I've really appreciated it. So after going through what is, what if, what wows, what works, now I want to finish by asking, so what? Why does this all matter? And try and think about how we can bring this together, particularly in the context of your final reflective essay. So this final piece, that says 30%, and you're right, it says the 24th of October, the date I checked. I have a feeling it's actually only worth 25%, and I really probably should have double checked that, but you guys know, I'm pretty sure it's 25% and for 2,500 words. The reflective essay, the marking criteria for it are slightly different from the shorter reflective pieces that you've been doing, although some of you haven't been doing shorter pieces. Some of you have been writing close to this number of words on those little assessment tasks. But those little assessment tasks were designed to let me give you some feedback, and so that you would pull out of the reflective process what you needed to do well in this final, much more important piece. Before you ask me, if you've done something in one of the reflective pieces that you want to expand on and you want to address any feedback that I've given you and expand it into a more formal piece, to answer, provided we're answering this question, or you talk to me beforehand, we would negotiate another question.
There's your water.
Oh, sorry, I'm going to mute whoever that is, because as usual, I can't listen and talk at the same time. Basically, particularly if you're not in an organisation at the moment, or you've just got something that you really think you want to explore and talk about more, I am very open to changing that topic for that final assessment piece. It just needs to meet the learning criteria. So we can certainly talk about that. A question that does come up quite a lot is, if you're not working in an organisation now, and particularly for those of you who are coming relatively straight out of your undergraduate degrees, you might find it very difficult to sort of focus this on an organisation itself. There's lots of different things you can do there. You can also think about switching design thinking back on yourself, how you would implement a design thinking project to work out what the next step in your career might be, for example. One of the things I've seen done very well a number of times is people looking at a business or quasi-business relationship that's very important to them. Some people will be volunteers in organisations, be involved in sporting clubs, or even in their kids' schools. And often turning this around and thinking about how you might introduce design thinking into that environment is really helpful. What I want you to think about is an organisation or a firm that you know relatively well and that you understand how it works, because I don't want you to be wasting your very, very valuable time doing research into how the organisation works. and you will need to really think deeply about how an organisation works to do well in this task. But again, if you have some other ideas about how you would get the most out of doing this, I am really happy to explore that with you. My ambition is always that these tasks will help you as you go through the rest of your MBA or whichever program you're in, but also in your real lives, to sort of take a kind of toolkit of these design thinking tools away with you, where you can then continue to use them and grow with them and adapt them to your own needs. And then also this week, I'm cheating a little bit when it comes to your final 2.5% for your individual submissions. Basically, all I want you to do this week is to give me some feedback. The feedback in relation to how your groups work. You'll get the 2.5% if you do it. There is no qualitative assessment in relation to that at all. And it will be completely confidential. I'm really interested in how the group dynamics work, and I know, well, I've been on the phone with a number of you over the last few days. I know group work hasn't been working perfectly for many, many people. And I really like, I'm unashamedly trying to work out how to do it better. I actually won't be teaching this course going forward, so but you're just sharing that data with me, but it will help inform me on how I can get better at working out how to put groups together and to moderate group tasks. But also, I hope the way that I framed the questions gives you an opportunity to reflect on what you might have done differently and what you will do differently going forward. Again, I just want you to share with me. The only compulsory question is effectively your name and what group you were in. And in fact, if you were one of the first 4 or 5 that went in, you weren't even asked your name, but there's, for some reason, a lot of people were having difficulty getting in. So I've now added the name in there because I'm not collecting the email data anymore. And you probably could have worked this out. I probably shouldn't tell you, but it wouldn't actually matter if you didn't answer the questions. If you don't want to answer them, or if you want to talk to me personally, that's absolutely fine. But if you don't do it, I'd like to know that you're not doing it on purpose. So that's why you get 2.5% for just getting in there, as opposed to just not being lazy about it. Any questions about that? Or in particular, actually, the reflective essay? I probably should have paused at that point. As always, you'll interrupt me by turning your sound on if you need to, and we'll go from there. So, group activity. I noticed today this one was yet again with these little conversations that were supposed to be in the groups only. It's turning out that the conversation is actually with everybody in the class. I didn't get in to adjust it soon enough, and for that I apologise. I almost wrote to the people who had submitted to say I'm going to set it up again and can you resubmit, and then I thought, you know, actually there have been so many groups that have had negative experiences and positive experiences as well. I thought it might actually be useful for all of you to just have a whip through and see that your group is not alone. So clearly that is a forum that's facing the larger group, and you might like to take that into account. And those of you who've already submitted, if that impacts anything you say, I did read them. They're all overwhelmingly positive about the experience. Overall, I mean, all of them point to issues that happened, but you've been, the ones that were written in the appropriate style for the public facing. And again, that's just, again, straight quantitative assessment. You do it and you do it appropriately, you'll get full marks. You don't do it, or you do it inappropriately, and you'll get no marks. I've abandoned my scrappy drawing of where the hero's journey is, in place of this one that was done by my friend and colleague Mark Boys, who I was lucky enough that we actually co-taught this course last semester together. So in fact, I think, well, he was in from about week 4. There were just too many students last time and it was just too overwhelming. And Mark and I have merged our classes before. So we've often tried, when we're doing intensives, one of us will teach the executive MBA, the other one the MBAs, and then we kind of do some things together and some things separately. And we really like collaborating together, and we think it's a great way to model the kind of collaboration approach that we think there's real value in. And Mark is a much more gifted artist than I am. And so this picture is actually his version of the hero's journey. And I sort of stumbled across it the other day and thought, yeah, I'm actually going to bring this in, because I think it's sort of, as we've reached the end of the journey, it sort of brings it into stark relief. And you know, just sometimes just looking at the same thing in a slightly different way just helps remind us of the value of it. So we started off ordinary people, some kind of call to action had happened that meant that you had enrolled in this program and you've ended up in this subject. And so you started off in this process of what is. You started off finding your mentors, the textbook, and the other people in the group. You saw those 4 questions. You had an overview look at that, the 10 tools. You very early on were set a really nasty challenge. I'm still really proud of it to this day, and that is that doing that television commercial. For a lot of you, that put you way, way, way out of your comfort zone, and yet you put your shoulders back, you sorted it out and you shared it. The fact that you couldn't see what anybody else had done until you shared your own, my hypothesis here is that's one of the reasons that you just lifted your games. And then, of course, everything was so good. All of you have maintained that kind of level of high standard the whole way through. So when we started this whole what is process, there are a couple of things that we tried to do. We tried at the beginning to avoid the crystal ball, to stop being solution focused and to fall in love with our problem. The falling in love with the problem is my language, not Mark's, which is I need to alter his drawing, need to collaborate on the drawing. And so we use a whole heap of techniques to really get a deep and empathetic understanding of what our problem really is, ultimately to be able to define our problem. And in that stage, you kind of had to take a leap of faith with me here and play with these tools that you hadn't seen the outcomes of yet, like or visualization, which we've used over and over again in every stage of this process. But we've had a number of cracks at journey mapping. We had a good try at value chain analysis, and we did quite a lot of mind mapping, including using mind mapping, by the way, is sometimes called affinity clustering. Affinity clustering is just a fancy word for mind mapping, just organizing and reorganizing data in different ways. And then we moved into the unknown. So we sort of went sunk underworld or into the belly of the problem, so to speak, to explore the what if stage. And there are lots of issues there. Oh, Mark has put falling in love with the problem in there. How funny. Because the what if stage is really about using those identifiers, using those gaps, using those opportunities that you've explored when you've been doing the what is stage, to think about what the solution might be. And so a lot of that is about these new ideas, a lot of stuff around ideation, and all of that requires being comfortable with our creativity. I have to say, probably the highlight of the course for me was looking at the exercise where you had to visualize your creative fears. And some of them were just, I would really love to be able to share them at some stage. There was someone in this room who used plasticine, and that just took my breath away, actually. I just thought it was a piece of art. There was a hand-drawn self-portrait, which was absolutely stunning. And one of my favorites basically was shall we call it a collaboration, a customer co-collaboration, including drawings from family members and coloured in by children, and I absolutely love that. But, you know, now, as I say, I mentioned the ones that come to mind now, it makes it sound like there were some that I loved more than others, and there are some that really did take my breath away. But what really I loved about marking those was the level of trust and engagement that you had with this process. And as you thought about what your creative fears were, you thought about how you might let go of those with a view to coming up with as many ideas as possible. And again, the numbers of ideas, particularly from the 3 groups who came up with the most ideas, was just stunning. And they were so broad. And as a concept, as a consequence, there were so many excellent ideas. But of course, around this time, you ended up in the pit of despair, and some of you did seek help and where things were going. You were very busy. By this stage, we're past the middle of the semester. Everybody's tired. The shiny, I'm going to do an MBA, an online study part has worn off. Your family members are getting cranky with you. Your boss is not thinking it's a great idea. We had another number of people who were really sick, which is just so disappointing for them and so difficult for other group members. But at the end of the day, we got there. You started doing a hell of a lot of reflection and thinking a lot about what it took to get to a point of change. And so ultimately we ended up in that what wows stage. And what wows is all about finding the ideas that are most likely to meet that, I call it the Holy Trinity, the desirability, viability, feasibility trinity, that when we can overlap each of those, that's where we're most likely to find value. And as a consequence of that, you did some low fidelity prototypes. It would have been great to be able to extend into the next level, but clearly we can't always do that. And you narrowed down to a smaller number of ideas that you think are worth starting to co-create and expand on with customers and ultimately pilot or move into a learning launch. And that stage is really what's come together over the last week or so when you've been putting your presentations and pulling together your final reports. And so then you are on your homeward journey now. You're returning with some new tools, you're returning with some gifts that you didn't have before, and you'll return back to that ordinary life. But your ordinary now is a new ordinary that has some design thinking skills behind it, hopefully some new friends, hopefully some new ways of thinking about the world. And this is our new reality, is around what works. And your challenge in this final reflective piece is really to think about what works for you out of these design thinking tools, and which ones are you going to carry with you into your future, which ones are you going to abandon, how are you going to take what you learned or what you had the opportunity to learn in this course and ensure that your new version of ordinary is supercharged. So then as we can sort of look at where the whole picture is, I guess we can also think about any kind of journey or reflection journey as thinking about the self-doubt, the drowning in data stage, the pulling it all together stage, and then debuting off into a new version of you. So I spent a little bit more time than I usually do, just reminding us where we are, because, you know, we're almost at the end. And really what I want to spend the rest of today talking about is how companies can use design thinking now that we've got through the whole of the process in a strategic way. So most companies are excited about innovation, but most still don't really get it. Incorporating design thinking create all sorts of obstacles and problems, particularly if you need to convince or explain what design thinking is. Though interestingly, a number of people in reflections have mentioned about how they've actually been doing design thinking. They just didn't know that that's what it was. And even so, even though it's difficult to introduce from time to time, and that you do need to champion it, design thinking really can help shift bureaucracy. And maybe an initial wicked problem you might like to think about is, how do you onboard design thinking in your organisation? So if we're going to think about design thinking as a strategic tool, I want to ask you a question, just to make sure we're on the same page. What is strategy? So this is a word we use all the time. MBAs are great at strategy, but what is strategy? Can somebody have a hazard at defining it for me?
A plan.
A plan? So a plan for what?
Plan to achieve and move forward.
Yeah, achieve and move forward is, so I guess we often talk about strategic plans, and I think of a strategic plan as being a bit like a map, and strategy as being the destination. And just trying to understand what a strategy, and it's one of the things, I know it when you see it. There's a difference between an operational plan and a strategy. Anybody else got any sort of, in chess, we say strategy is the long-term objective where tactics are the short-term win. And I think that, don't think I've ever had a chess player in the group before, Jordan, but absolutely a long-term objective. And the long-term objective in chess is really to get the king, isn't it? But you can't win if you lose your queen. So, and if we think about business from the point of view of, humans have lives that are ultimately limited by time. The objective of a business should be to continue ad infinitum. And so continuing and succeeding is sometimes about winning, but that's not always about beating somebody else. So there's a lot of different definitions of strategy, and you're going to be asked this question, and you are going to think about this question over and over again during the program that you're doing. So you could go far as back, actually the 80s, and so Porter, who you'll come across, Michael Porter's work a lot over the course of your MBA, was really one of the first academics to really define and write about what strategy is. But there are plenty of others. So what have I got in my notes here that I really want to say? In relation to design thinking, or in a design thinking context, Lydekker has talked about design thinking as being in line with a flexible, adaptive approach, like the Mintzberg approach to top-down planning-based design for strategy. So the creation of a recipe. Porter, on the other hand, explained that strategy is really how an organisation that's faced with competition is going to achieve superior performance. And I think that's the definition I like the best. I had this great strategy lecturer when I did my MBA. He was, I can't think of his surname at the moment, Jack. He was from Texas. He had this real drawl, and he'd just say, strategy is winning. It's winning over and over again. And I actually think that's the perfect definition for it. Strategy is how you win. Now, the thing is, if you think about winning in the sense of beating the competition, as that ultimately is a zero-sum game. Competing to be the best ultimately limits your opportunity. And so strategy is often about competing to be unique, to differentiate yourself from the competitors, to either create or focus on a particular market segment. And I think one of the best ways of explaining this is thinking about the music industry. If we just assume that we have to be the best, there is underpinning this idea that there is one best and that all the businesses in that particular space are achieving to do the same thing. And best then falls out as a qualitative metric, often price. But if we think about competing to be unique, then we can have many, many different musicians playing very many songs, very many different genres and approaches, and all of them compete with each other. Some rise higher and some never get anywhere at all, but they're not doing the same thing. They're each competing to be unique and to add value in their own way. And ultimately, strategy is about finding different methods to achieve different outcomes. And design thinking is all about different methods and different outcomes. Design thinking encourages frequent testing, refining of the strategy early in the process. It provides an opportunity to gather feedback and uncover problems as the strategy unfolds, rather than waiting to assess the strategy after it's all been locked down and rolled out. So design thinking is about getting the right design before we worry about getting the design right. So what we need to do is understand exactly what our problem is, fall in love with our problem, and then fit round pegs into round holes, square pegs into square pegs. A good way to think about this is, can anybody whistle? I actually can't whistle. But anyway, I had a kid who was learning to whistle at one stage. And when he was learning to whistle, that was all he could do. Like, he's just going around the house going, see, I can't do it. But he could, and it was loud, and it drove everybody crazy. And I think design thinking can be a little bit like that, that you can just fall a bit in love with the process and then you're trying to design think everything. So what I would encourage you to do early on is to actually resist the urge to supersize the design efforts that you have. What you really need to do is think small. Make sure that you've got the right kind of problems that suit design thinking so that you can get the best possible outcome, and again, to get champions behind the ideas that you have. Selecting let me go back a step. Design thinking is a team sport, and selecting the right team is a really important element of that. I know you all have recent, not all of you, but many of you have recent experience of how hard it is to work in a diverse team. And true diversity, not just gender, race diversity, but people who think differently is what you're aiming for. Now, I had someone who remained nameless who suggested that maybe I should put all the blokes in teams together at one stage, or all the women in teams, or all the foreigners together. And I know you were joking. But at the end of the day, even if I did that, I would hopefully end up with diverse teams. That my aim was, in putting teams together, was hopefully to either make you located in similar spaces where possible, but if I couldn't do that, to not weight it too much that there was, you know, one person somewhere and everybody else somewhere else, to give you geographical diversity. But ideally, as much as I was able on the limited information that I had, I wanted you to have different experiences, to be at different points in your lives, and to think about, to be open to thinking about things differently. Another thing about managing a design thinking approach strategically is to manage the momentum. Keep up the pace. Nothing kills a project quicker than delays. And design thinking is all about short, sharp experiments. And so you are better to do something quickly under pressure than to do nothing. As programmers will often tell me, on time is almost early. Well, we want to move things over and over again. Actually, Jordan's made a comment in the chat, which I'm going to leave you to read because I can't read out loud at the same time. But keep that conversation going there as well. And then lastly, I'd say be ready for terror. We often associate design thinking with happiness and positivity. But ultimately, design thinking is about uncovering some hard truths. And so it's important to be ready for that. It's important to be ready for not only yourself to be challenged, but you're expecting that now because you're on your way back to your new ordinary life. If you're trying to introduce this in a broader framework with your own organization or your family, or you're thinking things through, then I think it is a really important thing to expect that other people might not be as comfortable, for example, with their creativity as you are. And that can be something that you need to have some empathy for and think about. Ultimately, I would argue being able to use design thinking in any organisation requires the right kind of culture. And culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, probably breakfast, lunch and dinner if we think about it. A lot of organisations will employ a top-down approach to innovation. In other words, the strategy is formulated at the top, and major initiatives for achieving that strategy are formulated at the top, and it kind of trickles down everywhere else. Many of you might have seen diagrams that look a little bit like this. You start off with a mission or a value statement, and then maybe you haven't seen it as a diagram, but you would have seen this idea that, well, this is the company's strategy, and we're going to, with this strategy, we're going to achieve these goals, and these are our objectives, and these are the activities that we're going to do in order to get the results. And that side of the chain is basically the guiding path. That side of the chain is the overview direction, the map, if you will. But at the end of the day, unless we have the corresponding culture piece, we're going to be out of balance. So culture is ultimately about the values of the organisation. And again, you will, in different subjects, particularly leadership and managing organisations, you'll talk a lot about culture. And we've got a number of HR professionals in the group who already think and breathe this all the time. But the values of an organisation, and I'm talking about the real values that are evidenced by the way people behave, what they do as opposed to what they say they do, they are ultimately what gets strategic things done or not. And values play out in the practices and the behaviours, and ultimately they go to the results. So a strategy path defines what needs to be done, and a culture path emphasises how things are usually actually done. The best companies maintain an alignment between the two, but the worst companies will only focus on that left-hand side. And you need to focus on the right as well. We couldn't go this far into an MBA subject without having an iceberg metaphor somewhere. And so I really just had to bring it out for the last one. I'm sure I haven't had enough of those 4-box matrices in this course as well, but we can make some up as we go if you like. So really here, when it comes to culture, we've got to remember that really most of what feeds culture is underwater. Sure, we can see the behaviours and attitudes, the habits and the feelings, the expressed feelings and emotions of members of the team. But we don't see what they think unless they share it. We don't see the assumptions and biases that they carry with them. And we don't see, again, unless they're expressed, their values and belief. And then we have a whole unknown layer. unknown layer to the individuals involved in the culture themselves, the habits that they have, the future experiences that they seek, and their unconscious thoughts. So it's the unseen factors that drive behaviour. It's our collective behaviours that determine culture. It's both bottom up and top down, but change needs to start from the top. All too often we only focus on what we see, and the artefacts, we don't incorporate the unseen or the unknown into our approaches. And design thinking helps us identify those things. One of the things that is worth really thinking about, particularly if you're designing a process for bringing design thinking into your organisation, is what it is that's going to motivate team members to take it on. The different forms of motivation listed on this slide can all coexist in the same person at the same time. Nearly all intrinsically motivated tasks that people do on the job have some kind of extrinsic motivators attached to them. So let me give you an example. You can be intrinsically motivated by the challenge of creating a strategy document, say, for a new product or service at the same time. So that can be a completely intrinsic thing, but at the same time, you will be driven by a deadline for presenting that strategy to the board. That the deadline itself is an extrinsic motivator. It's worth thinking about the types of programs and motivation tools that your organisation uses. Even being aware of what motivates you can really help. But ultimately, organisations can really only focus on the extrinsic things. The intrinsic stuff is about choosing the right people. Finally, to implement a coherent design thinking approach in an organisation, it's critical to develop and support a design thinking oriented culture. The latter is generally referred to as the glue that holds the organisation together and typically includes values, norms, symbols, language elements. So this is the visions and the posters, believe it or not, with a focus on designly characteristics. Cultural manifestations need to reflect a design drivenness, if that's even a thing. So one of the things, the example that I might use of how I've tried to do that in this course, I'd be really interested in whether it's worked for you, is starting each of these webinars with a reference back to our hero's journey and where we are. That bringing that common language together helps us, as remote and disparate as we are, to focus on the design path that we have. Partly, creating the kind of environment that you need in order to be able to promote design thinking in an organisation is ultimate nurture. And I guess the reason for having this on the slide is we're really thinking here more of the farmer than we are of the engineer. Farmers need to ensure crops have water, sunlight. They need to ensure that they're protected from external threats like rodents, pests, wild animals, and even the weather. Farmers need to ensure that crops are harvested at the right time, and they need to ensure quality and timely arrival to market. It's all about climate control as opposed to climate control. And think about farming or nurturing the right kind of culture as opposed to manufacturing it actually guides you in the kinds of things that might work or not work in your organisation. So lastly, I want to talk a little bit about business models, because one of the things that you asked to read this week, it's sitting on my desk somewhere, was some of the chapters from the Business Model Generation book. And again, the business canvas is a tool can almost guarantee you will return to a number of times. And the business model canvas is a really excellent way of bringing together on one page a whole heap of ideas and focusing in on the customer and the key stakeholders, and these things are going to fit together. So business model canvases, or business models I should say, are used to indicate who's offering what to whom and who expects what in return and how it's all going to work. So the business design idea really began as, the idea of business model as a design feature goes back to 1995. An academic called Slywotsky, I bet I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, who really called for this idea that we should think about the business itself as a design feature, and to have one way of looking at the totality. The company selects customers, defines and differentiates offerings, defines the tasks it's going to perform itself and those that it's going to outsource, how it configures resources, goes to market, creates utility for customers, or captures profit. And by trying to put a business model onto a canvas or onto one page, we're constantly thinking about how, as each lever is moved, what the impact is. So again, we're balancing that, to use that analogy, right brain, left brain behavior. So we might have some great ideas about what it is that a customer really wants, but in order to put those ideas into practice, we're going to have to make changes on the cost columns, which corresponding impacts on how we're going to get our revenue, or what revenues we will need to meet that. The central notion of a business model is to facilitate and enhance value for customers and to capture a portion of that value for organisations offering value propositions to customers. They express what a company offers, who it targets, and how this can be realised and how much ultimately can be earned by doing this. You are doing business degree after all, and businesses, even not-for-profit businesses, by the way, I hate that expression, not-for-profit, let me come back to that, they need to generate revenues. So why I don't like the name not-for is otherwise they cannot be sustained. I think we shouldn't call them not-for-profit. I think we should call them not for shareholder return, because that's actually what it means. And not-for-profit doesn't pay dividends to its shareholders. It reinvests everything back into the business model. But ultimately, any sustainable business needs to have more income, more incoming revenues than it does outgoing cost. This picture comes from Lloyd Dangle, actually, so very similar to Mark's drawings, and again, better than I could do, so I'm going to share this one. The business model canvas might seem a very late thing to introduce, but when you look at it, you will see that we have been talking in design thinking terms about many of the inputs into developing a canvas. So in particular, this one up here, let me just get a pen. I can't believe I waited this long to get a pen today. Here it is. This part here, why is it not working? No, not going to work for me today. Oh well. The cursor, no, not even the cursor is going to work. Oh yes, it is. This part here, the empathy map. Ultimately, this is just the empathy map. Basically goes into understanding the questions. We've talked a little bit about jobs to be done theory along the way, so Clayton Christensen and the milkshake being the big example, by really doing deep research, understanding what it is that our customer, our stakeholder, what they're really trying to do, what they're buying their milkshake or their hammer or their drill to do, what their biggest pains are, and what their expected gains are from hiring your product or service as opposed to the competitor's offering. So I really if you haven't done so already, I really encourage you to read those couple of chapters of the Business Model Canvas book. They're all available online. If you can get a hold of a physical copy, there's lots of pictures, so it might be easier for you to read on that. I would suggest not trying to read it on your phone, getting a tablet or logging into it on a larger screen will be useful to you. The table here represents a typical strategic management marketing process model. It's based on that rational, analytical, linear approach on one side, and then looks at design thinking on the other side. What's really important is to remember that as much as we love design thinking, and so far nobody's told me that you hate it, but I'm open to that, by the way, it's not going to be the right tool for every job. I think we said fairly early on, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. But here, when we can fall in love a little bit with the process, and we actually have to remember to fall in love with our problems and to bring the right tools to the problem. So the table here is really around identifying, or helping you identify, or reminding you how, because we did talk about this, I think, in the second or third week of the course, what are the right problems for design thinking and what are not. And particularly as you're doing this final individual piece, I commend you to go back and remind yourself about that. Remind yourself about it so that you can think about which problems you might bring design thinking to and how you would identify when it's not the right course of action. Over the course of the program, we've focused, because of the text we largely drew on what is, what if, what wows, what works model. But there are these, on the slide here, you'll see a number of different models. The one that many of you will be familiar with is the double diamond down on that bottom right-hand side. And often you'll see that sort of 5 hexagon approach, the IDEO approach. Design thinking is not a science, it's a process. And if these models resonate with you better, then you might find that you are better off using those models or one of these models to explain and articulate what it is that design thinking is and how it's going to help you solve your problem. I think too, it's really important to make sure that you understand that you don't design customers. You either understand them or you don't. You don't get to design them. Ideas are ultimately doomed if you fail to retrofit, ideas are doomed to fail if you try and retrofit a customer profile against a solution. It's okay to sketch out who the customer is, or to think about a customer profile. And obviously we use personas all the time, but you need to ultimately to go out and verify, get a reality check to make sure that the assumptions that you're drawing on are true. From the tests that you do, you then adapt and modify your understanding of who the customer is based on what you've learned. And it's only at that point, when you've got verified information, that you're ready to really design the final solution. And in class, clearly we can't do that. We don't have ethics clearance to do that. The more you use public transport yourself, the more likely you are to have been able to get closer to this. But in a real world organization, it's really important to remember that the customers are the customers, and they won't always do what they say. They won't always say what they do. Ultimately, organizations that are going to be able to succeed in this fast changing world need to be ambidextrous. They need to be able to balance left brain, right brain thinking, to be the right tools to the job. So thinking about how you would roll out or how you might test the use of design thinking in your organization requires you to think about what the best approach would be to ensuring that your organisation understands the challenges that it's facing. Ultimately, design thinking begins with doing. It's design doing. That's why this course has been designed the way that it has been, so that you will be not just reading about the theories, but when I say will, you've finished now, what you have been doing is not just reading about the theories, but actually putting them into action on yourself and ultimately on your own business or your business idea. Indira Nuri, who many of you will have heard of, she's the CEO of PepsiCo and quite a famous design thinker in her own right, says the following: the distance between number 1 and number 2 is always a constant. If you want to, you have to improve yourself, and the organisation gets pulled up with you. That's a big lesson. So as the AI personal trainer that is in my headphones keeps telling me, nothing changes unless something changes. And ultimately, if you want to introduce design thinking in your organisation, you've got to think about what those changes will mean for you. And that, my friends, is all I have to say. Questions, concerns, frustrations, compliments? I thought I'd bring champagne. Anybody want some? So quiet. I have no idea whether you're laughing or just sneering at me right now.
Need a drink. Yeah.
Tiny little bottle of champagne. I thought I would celebrate. Questions, concerns, anything?
So just to recap, Kath, for the end of the course, we have a reflective essay, individual feedback, and CNL wrap-up group activity.
Yep.
Am I missing something else?
I don't think so. So your little individual task this week is basically to fill out the survey that just goes to me on really what the worst things about your group were, is partly where that goes. Oh, that's very disappointing. I thought it would be a cork. Then the next, and the group activity is to participate in a very large group discussion, as it turns out, about what the best things about working in a group were. What were the things in your group, ultimately, group work, that you'll take on to the next one? And then the big one is your individual assignment. So, and that's it. Unless you'd like me to set a few extra assignments for you if you're going to miss them. I can't mark them or anything, but, you know, if you just want to randomly get me to give you extra things to do, I'm happy.
No, that's perfect. That's such a great way to end the course, these nice little summary tasks. Cheers.
Well, that's the plan, is for you to take it away with you, because you guys have worked so hard this semester. And I don't apologise for that. I'm really just recognising how hard you've worked. You've done such great stuff. I want you to have a toolkit now that you can take with you in to the next lot of courses. So, yeah, and I very much hope that you'll stay in touch and let me know where you end up. Lovely, remember, set up a LinkedIn group. So if you haven't joined that yet, I strongly recommend that you do. And cheers.
Cheers. Good job as well. It was an excellent course. And yeah, you did really well delivering it. I really enjoyed doing the course. So thank you.
That's been my pleasure. I'm well, you guys are my last ones. I won't be doing it going forward. So I'm a bit sad. I'm a bit sad to be finishing up, but very happy to finish up with such a great group of people and such a diverse and interesting group of people. I know it might not always feel like it when you're in the depths of the group work, but I think you're really lucky to have each other. I think this is a really really great group.
Thank you, Catherine. All the best for the future.
Thank you. You too, Walid. So as always, I'm around. Oh, okay. Actually, I will finish on a couple of admin things. One is those of you who do not live in Victoria and didn't realise that there was a daylight savings change, or did but didn't think it mattered, don't worry. I'm not a psychopath. Just if I come back and say, oh, that was late, because I haven't realised that you live in the wrong place, because Melbourne is the right place. I said I didn't say I wouldn't be judgmental. That's my unconscious bias. So don't worry about that. Secondly, and this is the big one, I have not managed to get through all of the presentations yet to provide you with feedback. If I think there's something that is massive that you want to take into account in your reports, I would have let you know. If I've looked at the presentation, I haven't been able to get through them all yet. If when you get my feedback, you think there is something that you want to fiddle around with in your report and you think it's worth your time and effort doing that, it probably won't be. But if you do, I will give you the opportunity to do that. It's my apologies. It's just, I don't know. I just underestimated how long it would take me to get through all of that marking. And it's just been, I just seem to have been on the phone all week. So largely to you guys, so you know how busy I've been. So yeah, those two notes. If anybody wants to get snarly with me about it, I'm here. Ring me and snarl at me, and then I won't be marking your essay while you're doing that, or your presentation. The ones I have looked at, some of them are outrageously good. And well, I haven't seen a bad one yet, and I've seen a couple that are really, really strong. So I am very much looking forward to finding a way to share the presentations with all of you if you're interested. Okay. Oh, well, I'm a bit sad now, but I'm going to end the meeting, and we'll hopefully our paths will cross again.
Thanks, Kath. Keep in touch.
Thank you, Kath.
Thanks, Kath.
See, oh, you're in the car, Lara. That's very cool.
It's only 6 o'clock here. I'm on my way home from work. No, I'm not driving.
It looks like you're driving.
Oh, no, I'm not. I promise. Look.
Okay. Actually, we've got headphones.
Yeah.
So she's been driving, is like really bored. Or she could have been on mute and just talking to them the whole way anyway.
No,
I've
been
a design
listening.
thinking solution.
Yeah, I just get my boyfriend to pick me up, and he just sits here quietly while I do this. So it's very good.
And actually, that's my final note. Please kiss your significant others from me and say thank you, because I took you away from them a lot. And I appreciate that, because they're investing in your future too. And so you should appreciate them too. So that will be my closing remarks. And I look forward to talking to you along the way as we get through the end.